singular city.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess including the Vatican. But yeah. All right. Well, I think we'll probably get started. So welcome everybody. Hello, hello. Welcome to today's ArtEvolve. Today's ArtEvolve is making art world spaces neurodivergent friendly. And I'm definitely excited to talk about this on my end. As everyone knows, I'm not hello@articheck.com, but my name is Mackenzie and I am ArtEcheck's CEO. And I have two guests with us today, so double the trouble for you. The first is Jennifer Gilbert, a gallerist and founder and director of Jennifer Lauren Gallery. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hi.
Hi. And then the second is Sonia. Your last name, I'm sorry. You'll have to.
That's fine. It's Sonia Bouet.
Sonia Bouet. Okay. So kind of the French pronunciation. A neurodivergent multiform artist and a writer on autism and art and a leading consultant for neurodiversity in the arts. Welcome, Sonia.
Thank you.
Thank you both. So I'll just give a quick intro as to why the heck I decided to do this week so that everybody knows. And then I'll love to go into kind of more of an introduction of Jennifer and Sonia, who are really, you know, the people we're here for today. So I decided to bring this up as a topic that we wanted to do for our ArtEvolve series, which has been running for about 2 years now. And I decided to do that because I am autistic and ADHD, so many neurodivergencies overlapping in my brain. And I think it's something that is starting to become talked about more in professional spaces, but I haven't seen it talked about a lot in art spaces. I think it's kind of a little bit more nascent, maybe, and maybe more in the artist spaces and less in the workplace spaces. So I wanted to kind of take this opportunity to meld those conversations together and kind of bring them into one. So Jennifer, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what you do?
Great. Well, I'm Jennifer. I run the Jennifer Lauren Gallery. I run it in Manchester. I don't actually have a physical gallery space. It's far too expensive. I do pop-up exhibitions, art fairs, events, and that sort of thing. I work with a core group of about 20 artists through my gallery who are self-taught, disabled, neurodivergent, and deaf artists from around the world. And alongside my gallery work, I work as a freelance producer and curator with disabled, deaf, and neurodivergent artists, mostly across the UK. So through this, I support a lot of them with funding applications. And then when they get their funding, I support them with that. I've worked with small groups of artists on their professional development. So this includes teaching them how to run workshops so that they can then go out into the world and run workshops and kind of start to come off the benefits system, I guess, and that sort of thing, and teaching them all about how to set that up properly, the risks that might be involved, and all that side of it. And then I gently break them into it. So I'm not just going to do it and then throw them into an art gallery to run a workshop. We've done things online with like peer groups, and then they've run other online workshops with slightly wider, more open groups, and then they've come into spaces when they feel comfortable with me. So I would never push anyone to do anything that they wouldn't want to. So alongside my gallery work, I also run a few other projects. I co-founded a project called ArtEvolve that Sonia actually sits on the steering group for. ArtEvolve is an online platform again that works across the UK and Australia, and it works with neurodivergent, intellectually and learning disabled artists. And it does a lot of collaborative work and a lot of commissioned work. So one of the things is called peer-to-peer, where we pair a disabled artist in one country with a contemporary artist in another country to collaborate together in whatever form they wanted to collaborate digitally, through Zoom calls, through making artwork, and that sort of thing. Another thing that we do is that we commission contemporary writers to write critical pieces of writing about the disabled artist's work, because it's quite rare to find something like that doesn't focus on the artist's disability. So we commission people to write specifically about people's art practice, which is really important. I also run a project called Shift, where I work with learning disabled and neurodivergent artists, and I'm trying to raise the profile of them And so far I've made 8 films documenting these artists, because I feel like they're starting to be lost within art history. They're not featured in collections, and I'm trying to bring curators into the conversations to see how we can move forward, how we can get more of this work programmed into bigger galleries and museum spaces, how to get it into their collections, how they can work with more of these artists and that sort of thing. So that's me in a quick nutshell.
Well, yeah. Oh my gosh, I can't believe how much you're doing. So many different facets. So that's
And if anyone is UK based, I have an exhibition on in Margate at the moment called "To All the Kings Who Have No Crowns," that showcases 17 self-taught and disabled artists from around the world, and it's on until the 3rd of April.
Okay.
So yeah.
Wonderful. So yeah, maybe some of our Artitech crew who's down in London, go ahead and check it out. All right, Sonia, how about you? Tell us what you do.
Yeah, I just want to add that Jennifer really is remarkable, and has also, I have experience, I mean, it's just so proactive, and you know, one of the busiest people I know getting things done. And she's also worked with me on one of my Arts Council England funded projects. And I think one of your particular skills is that you really can give an overview of an artist's work and facilitate that artist to disseminate professionally in the sector, you know, sort of like give talks, you know, present online. And I think that is something that's really, really beneficial, because what I'm probably about to say is that online is a very important space for neurodivergent professionals, because we can quite often find access in you know, in real life quite challenging. So about me, I am a neurodivergent autistic multiform artist. As you said in the introduction, Mackenzie, I am a writer as well. I've been writing for in a private sort of personal blog for many years now, probably since about 2013. But more recently being commissioned to write for arts organisations. Sorry, that's my front door going. Arts organisations. And I've just recently written, actually, Jen, if you could possibly find the link and put it in the chat for people, a booklet with Birmingham Open Media, who are an arts organisation based in Birmingham. It's a booklet that is part of their neurodivergent programmes, and it's called Am I Autistic? And it's a free downloadable resource for people with kind of insider information, the sort of things you need to know if you're considering an autism diagnosis or self-identification. So that's just one example of the kind of writing that I'm being asked to do now. I also do critical writing of the kind that Jen is talking about, where you're actually giving a proper critical review of somebody's work rather than talking about them as a disabled person. Mm-hmm. So there's that. But I guess the main strand of my work, which will be possibly of interest, is that I've developed a practice around self-led, publicly funded through the Arts Council, research-based projects in how to work as a neurodivergent autistic artist in very hostile, you know, kind of freelance environment. And this need arose around about 2015 when I got more or less got my, was just about to get my autism diagnosis. And I was making an Arts Council application, and I realized that I just needed extra support. So I started putting ideas into my applications, and I've since been funded. I think I've had about 4 projects now where I'm funded, and kind of the background to the project, or whatever the project subject matter is, or whoever I'm working with, the undercarriage of the project is, how do we do this autistically? What is the optimal way of working with neurodivergent creatives? And I'm very collaborative. I'm about social justice. I have a socially engaged practice. And yeah, I feel I also work as a consultant for arts organizations. So it feels like all my work now it's all part of the same thing. It's all part of the same idea of trying to move things forward. I'm also very experimental in my own visual arts practice. I tend to cross forms because that's what excites and interests me, and I'll work in whatever form suits the particular project or subject matter that I'm interested in. So I think that my practice is probably very different from a conventional art schooled practice. I am a self-taught artist, but I did train professionally as an art therapist, and my practice kind of flows from that experience of working with process-led techniques, throwing yourself into creating work, being very free with it. And I've gradually sort of used that beginnings of a practice to professionalize and think more about, kind of the product at the end as well, and the work being for a public space rather than a private sort of therapeutic investigation. So I'm sort of like,
I love that tie-in, by the way. I didn't know that little tidbit
sorry?
About the art therapy. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I think it's
So
fundamental to understanding all of my practice, including the socially engaged bit, because what I'm most interested in is how the transformative power of art to kind of, just empower individuals, help you express your emotions. And in reality, I sort of feel that most professional artists are kind of doing that to a degree anyway, but it's sort of spoken about in a different way perhaps. Or, obviously if you're working to a commission or you're working on a big public work, you're not going to make it necessarily all about you, but I still think that we put a lot of, it's the nature of the work that you put yourself into it. And I'm just interested in that being quite immediate and live and not too processed. And
yeah, definitely. No, that makes sense. And I think you're right. It's probably something, I mean, a lot of artists do that sort of like from a very visceral place, but you also have that art therapy training that I think is kind of an interesting addition to the mix. So why don't we jump in a little bit and start getting into our some of the things we're going to talk about today. The other thing, by the way, that you mentioned, Sonia, that is obviously very true, and I think, probably some people in our audience will agree with, is the online space being much more, accessible, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I've always worked remotely for my whole career. I was diagnosed when I was 19, and I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to have to accommodate myself. So let's see how we do that. Yeah. So, and I think it's great, honestly, how much more open now institutions are to working online and having some of their team be working online at least part of the time. So I think it opens up opportunities, definitely. Yeah. So, but we'll get into that. But first, let's talk about what you both see as some of the biggest obstacles for neurodivergent professionals in the art world today.
I thought Sonia might be best placed to answer this, but one of the big things that me and Sonia have discussed actually is, now that we're coming out of the pandemic, the jump of everyone going straight back into in-person events and like the online that's made everything so accessible over the last 2 years just completely disappearing overnight. Like the talks have gone straight back to in-person, there's no hybrids. The people were doing online tours on their websites, that's stopped now. So it's gone back to how it was before the pandemic, but the pandemic made it so much more accessible to so many more disabled and neurodivergent artists and housebound artists that could never get to these spaces. And it feels quite sad actually that it's automatically just reverted back to how it was, and they haven't realized the benefits for so many people of this online, these tours, these talks, the importance of that, and it's just been forgotten.
Yeah, I would completely concur. It feels like the space is just emptied out, like stampede into our space. I'm calling it our space. I know it's everybody's space, but it felt like that. It felt like suddenly everybody needed to be here, and now stampede in the opposite direction. And it's like, where is everybody? Where is the offer? It's gone, and that just, I remember just feeling awful. I've kind of almost got used to it again now, but it isn't, it's not great. It really isn't.
And so like Sonia was saying earlier, being in like busy spaces and stuff for a lot of neurodivergent artists, or like around so many people that they don't know at once, it is quite overwhelming. So these online spaces were perfect for that. They could have their video on, they could have their video off, you do what you feel safe. I've been on talks where I've been talking to people that have been in their pajamas and they're like, I just feel comfortable, it's fine, and no one's blinking an eyelid, whereas it all seems to have been taken away now, and it's not making it open to those artists. Like if you're trying to bring neurodivergent people into your space, you're completely turning them away at the door by taking it straight back into the same format that it was before.
Definitely. And I think that extends to professionals, especially those who might have been hired remotely during the pandemic, right? Because there were a lot of people who were hired when the entire team was remote. And so the job postings, as far as I saw, where a lot of them, said, remote working, all of that, all those kind of keywords, right? And then people were hired in those positions, and now they're being asked to go into the office without any consideration of that. And so I think, that can be really daunting for sure. Especially if you've been so successful up until now in your role, and then they're saying, oh, well, actually, you now need to be in this environment where you may not be as successful at your job because we've decided that you need to be here in person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Definitely.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, that's awful. And then the other, so I'm at the moment doing some anti-ableism training for the Welcome collection, and I'm working on neurodivergent side of things, and I'm calling it anti-neurotypicalism, the bit that I'm working on. For anybody who doesn't know, neurotypical is kind of the term that has been used for people who are not autistic or neurodivergent. And I think I would say, because there are so many barriers, and if you want me to say what the main barrier is, I think it really is a lack of knowledge base about neurodivergence. So it's become a buzzword. People are talking about it. We're listed in opportunities now when people are trying to talk, about and to marginalized groups and to try and be more inclusive. But I'm always a bit horrified when I see a rush of things appearing, a rush of opportunities appearing, because I think, yes, but do you actually have the knowledge to support people? And I think it's this real lack of understanding, because we do have this kind of really deeply embedded bias in our society around social norms, and because social norms dictate absolutely everything in education, in family life, in personal relationships, and at work, particularly at work, you're always disadvantaged in ways that you are trying to articulate, but you're trying to articulate it within a context of bias. Mm-hmm. So it's an uphill struggle, and it feels like we're swimming against the tide constantly. And so my approach to this is really why I focus on self-led projects, which are publicly funded, because I can direct my own kind of, process, and I can decide on the kind of opportunities that I would like to create for myself, and I try to tailor them for myself. I realize that's a very privileged position. It's one that I've had to work quite hard for, but I have been lucky with the people who've helped me learn how to do funding applications. So I think the work that Jen does is absolutely crucial, and I do a bit of it too. I pass on the knowledge that I have, because the other thing that happens to us is, even when we do get access to opportunities, and even when we are supported to a certain point, we will still often reach a point where we can go no further, because neurodivergence doesn't go away. Neurodivergence is a lifelong difference. It's a variation of the human genome, and the systemic barriers are so sort of overwhelming and all-encompassing that it doesn't matter how far you get, you will always reach a point of disablement. And I've had that kind of so many times in my career where I've thought, oh, I've learned how to do this now. I've got through this barrier. Now I'm sorted. Now I can be an arts professional.
Mm-hmm.
And then I hit another brick wall and I think, oh. And so I'm kind of trying to learn from that and say, okay, well, actually, my job now is to try and lobby for different opportunities and opportunities that we design ourselves. And what I want is I want the sector to listen and to adopt some of the ideas of neurodivergent professionals around, say, for example, the last project I did, Jennifer knows that I experienced ableism on my project. And I started thinking about introverted ways of showing my work because I felt completely exposed. I was doing work about my lived experience for the first time. I felt completely exposed. And I just felt like I wasn't being supported by some of the sectors that, you know, people within the arts that I was expecting to be supported by or hoping to be supported by. And I just felt very vulnerable. And I thought, yeah, this is not great. If you're already bringing, you know, vulnerabilities that are around, you know, a different lived experience, and you're having to sort of try and be extrovert about your work in the way that you're supposed to in the art world and have an opening and have everybody come and look at your work all at once. How overwhelming is that? You know, so maybe we can think about ways in which we can do this differently. And what I did was I invited people one by one to look at some online work and give me a bit of feedback. And that worked beautifully for me. And then I wasn't overwhelmed. I didn't have a great big reveal. Here's my grand opening. I'm having a big party. You know, that didn't, I've never had a party in my life that I've enjoyed. You know, why would I want to do that? So it's creating around, it's like tailoring things and then having the platform to talk about it and tell people and say, actually, we need something different. We need more of this and we need more of that. And less, absolutely less, you know, less is more. So yeah, that's, I'm sorry, that's a very long rambling explanation of what I think the biggest barrier is, but I really think it's just the innate difference and how poorly that's still understood, that profoundly different. And, and that's just not grasped. Well, people think you can, you know, they think you can offer something quite superficial and that will suffice, and it really doesn't.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you made some great points. I think something that you were saying, you know, where you kind of eventually are going to hit a wall that is disabling, whatever facet that comes from, right? I think a big part of that in terms of the institutions becoming more, you know, neurodivergent friendly, but also, you know, more just accessible to disability generally, is to have people at the top who are disabled to be able to make those decisions, right? So we're lucky enough, we're a small institution, right? We're a small organization, but we do. And so we can make decisions like about our culture that are able to make our spaces more neurodivergent friendly. That's something that's been very important to me since I came into Articheck a few years ago. But it's hard because, I mean, I'm sure you both know, but about like 17% of autistic people in particular are fully employed, right? Are not underemployed or unemployed, but fully employed. And so if you take that statistic into account, and that's worldwide, right, more or less, and then you look at how many of those people work in the arts world, and then how many of them are in management in the arts world, those numbers are very, very small.
Yeah, it's a huge problem, but I think you're absolutely right. Sorry, Jen, you were going to say something.
Well, a couple of things. I was gonna, the thing is as well, if there isn't, Sonia did this amazing project called Nuno that has a really great evaluation to it that I do recommend that people read, because
shall I get the link?
Yeah, you highlight about having autistic leaders and the importance of having autistic leaders. But I think if that is not possible in your organization for whatever reason, the idea of having these people that you can call upon, like Sonia or like like having almost like a disability steering group that you run things past from the get-go, not from when the projects are already down the line. These people come in from the start to advise you, and you're paying them for their time to talk to them about all the different things involved. And I think that's, I did that with my project Shift, and I talked to a lot of different disabled and neurodivergent people from the outset, so that it was really built with access, with the aesthetics and everything. It was built with that in mind from the very start of the project, and nothing got started to get built until that happens. And I really do believe that more organizations need to have that in place, and also more organizations need to have training around, you know, what is neurodiversity and what does that mean. And it just doesn't happen, does it, Sonia? It's pretty much non-existent. People have just jumped on the bandwagon of, we're going to start using that term because everyone's using it. But if you actually said to them, but what does that mean? I think 9 times out of 10, they wouldn't have a clue.
They wouldn't have a clue. They'd just say, well, they'd probably just have to admit, well, we're adding it to our list when we put a call out. And that would be the extent of it.
Yeah, exactly. And so like Sonia said, you know, it's great to see that these call outs have neurodivergent and disability and stuff in the line. But then if it came down to it and someone got selected, are you going to have the right support in place to support those people through that project? And are you going to be aware of their needs? And are you going to be able to have the right conversations with them from the outset to make them feel safe and secure within that space? And I think, no.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I sort of think it can be doubly traumatizing to be offered something that appears to be for you and then discover it actually is not for you, not been thought through for you. Yeah. And I have actually, unfortunately, been, one of my contacts was telling me actually yesterday about a project where people were selected on the basis of disability, deafness or neurodivergence. And it was run by diversity specialists, but none of whom had the lived experience, which goes back to your point, Mackenzie. None of them had the lived experience of disability or any of those things, neurodivergence or in fact deafness. So the opportunity was accessible in the sense that they selected people on the basis of a certain demographic, but the offer itself had not been designed around their needs and was no different than what would be offered to anybody else.
Yeah.
And it was that thought and the work that I've been doing for Welcome Collection that has got me thinking about one of the things that I'm trying to get across at Welcome is really more focused on autistic being than general neurodivergency, which we know also is very varied and different in each person and often overlapping and, you know, just incredibly complex. But for me, one of the key issues is the social difference and the experience of human relational connection being quite different. And I think if I can just get that one point across, I will be doing something. And I'm talking a lot about the instinctive grasp that autistic and neurodivergent people very often have of one another's lived experience and how we can relate more easily to one another. It's not that we don't have that ability, it's just that we as humans need to have the same or similar lived experience to be able to relate to it in another human. So,
well, I'm sure you know of the telephone game study, right?
Yes. Yeah,
absolutely. So for those in the audience who haven't heard of this was a pretty big study that was done and repeated multiple times that essentially had 3 groups of people. The first one being what we would call neurotypicals or non-autistics, the second group being entirely autistics, and then the third being a mixture. And they had a story that they had to pass along via the telephone game, you know, where you whisper in each other's ears to get to the end and see how the story comes out. And in the group of all non-autistics, the message came out more or less intact, right? In the group of autistics, the message came through more or less intact. And in the mixed group, it came through completely garbled.
Exactly. So that is, it's a beautiful demonstration. And what I also think is, in general, It's very, very interesting because I suddenly made this connection. There's something called the double empathy problem, which is a theory that explains this phenomenon, that the problem in relating to one another goes both ways. Historically, autistic people have been thought to be non-empathic. We've been stereotyped as being, you know, unable to relate emotionally to other humans. That's not the case. It is simply that across different neurological types, we have a communication problem because we're using the same language, but we're talking about a different lived experience. And I suddenly thought that lack of intuitive grasp of the lived experience of disability in non-disabled people, maybe that's similar too, because it seems to be so hard for non-disabled people to think intuitively about what to do to accommodate and provide access for disabled people. So I think we're onto something here that is actually not just about autism and non-autistic people, but is actually about lived experience. And a more human general part of the human condition is if we haven't lived something, it's much harder to relate to it. And that, I think, is the key problem in a nutshell.
So if we were going back to, where we kind of came from with this discussion, which is particularly artists and neurodivergent artists in being brought into these spaces, right? Let's say you're talking to a gallery or a museum that's doing a call out for neurodivergent artists. What's one thing that they could change about that call out today that would improve it?
We've been having big conversations about this with another group of people recently. Me and Sonia have been having conversations with the Plus Tate network about just these sorts of things, actually, and how to make them more accessible. And like one of the things is the call out information itself, not just having it as like text. I mean, it needs to be quite a simple piece of text anyway, but having an easy read version available is like, it's not just good for like learning disabled and autistic people, it's good for everyone. Like if I'm looking at the Arts Council guidance, I read the easy read version because it's like, this tells it how it should be without all this big rubbish nonsense that we don't need to know about. I just need to know the key facts. Let's look at the easy read. So they should have things like easy read versions.
Documents.
Easy read versions, and like if they're trying to go to deaf artists as well, BSL versions, and also to give people enough time. Like some call outs are like a week long, and it's like that is not enough time for people to process it and then start to think about it. So longer deadlines on things, being able to submit in different ways, not having to submit in the form. Can you submit a video? Can you submit audio instead of the way that you do it? And then the other thing that's we were talking about as well was like, is there an access pot of money available? Because some disabled and neurodivergent people have access to work, and they might have someone that's able to support them, but not everyone is able to get that. So is there a pot of money that they could contact you and say, I need someone to spend half a day with me doing this application, do you have a pot of money, or is there a staff member that can support me to do this? Because otherwise you're shutting them out before they've even begun to get involved in the situation, because it's not accessible to them.
And I think sometimes that's, I mean, if you're thinking about the way that general society kind of perceives neurodivergent people, particularly those who would self-identify as disabled, I think it's sometimes like, well, you can make the art so you can fill out the application, right? But in fact, for us, they are such different things, right? So yeah, definitely.
And if you're
that's so true. That's so true.
Of like 1,000,001 questions, you put off in the first place, because you can't even see past the first two questions because you're just seeing this very long list of things, and you're like, I don't even know where to begin right now.
Absolutely.
What were you going to say, Sonia? Yeah.
Well, I just wondered, it just so happens that I've been asked to do a feature in which one of the questions was, and it has to be very, very pithy, this feature, 3 top tips for good practice.
Oh.
So I thought I might read those out.
Yeah, please.
So the first one echoes exactly what Jen's just said. Allow for multiple communication styles and formats in all your interactions, comms and marketing and call outs. And yes, that also includes, as you say, Jen, allow back all formats as well.
Yeah.
Exactly what you said, light touch. How many artists have spent 4 days writing an application for an open call that they didn't even get shortlisted for? You know, that's time and money you're never getting back, and you're not going to be paid for. And then I've also put this, so this is for organizations, be flexible about opportunities and offers. Think bespoke, not one size fits all.
That's important.
So I would like to see, I'm so tired of seeing opportunities that I just self-select out of, because it involves being in a strange place, being thrown together with a bunch of people on a residency, you know, being away from my home and my routines. You know, I'd have to work in a community that I've never been to and don't know anybody. I'd have to talk to people, you know, day and night. I'd have to socialize. You know, it's just horrible. Don't do that.
More accessible, because I think something, for example, that a lot of those residencies do is they put people in rooms together to try to get them to bond.
I know. I don't want to bond.
Like, I'm sorry.
That's my idea.
All day and night.
I know. That's my idea of hell. And I think you're made to feel like you're a terrible person, but it's not that. It's just that's not you. That's not your orientation.
Your best work either, right?
Yeah.
If that's their goal of the program.
Yeah. And this idea that you will benefit from being in a group of people rather than, actually, I'm going to be totally thrown off my center and lose the sense of who I am if I'm lumped together with a group of people. I don't learn that way. So understanding that people have different learning styles, I just need to, I'm autodidactic. Yes, occasionally I need a little bit of a steer, or I really benefit from a talk, but a little goes a long way for some people, you know, and it's just having that sense that, gosh, you know, and people say that autistic people are rigid and habitual, but you see the one flavor of opportunity that's out there that is all around certain social bias, and you just think, oh, not again. You know, why does it always have to be like that? Why can't it be something else? So again, that would involve having people with a lived experience actually designing those opportunities.
Look very much like a medieval monk's cloisters, I think.
Yes. Yes.
It's also what Sonia said about like having these opportunities, but making people aware that they're flexible. So say, like, if you had a 2-week-long residency for one person to go and do something somewhere, could you then say, you know, this could be done flexibly? You could do 2 days at a time.
Yes.
And then go back again, and, you know, or have like one day where you meet all the staff and you feel comfortable, and then mock up the program, like seeing how you feel when you're first there, and go, okay, I can do 3 days and then 3 days. But it's about that organization working with the individual to work out a flexible schedule that is suited to their needs, and also not lumping everyone with a disability into the same bracket. Not all autistic people are exactly the same. Not all disabled.
No.
Every person is an individual, and having those individualized conversations and realizing that every single person's needs are different is so important.
It's absolutely. And I'm just wondering if a really good practice would be to say, we would like to offer a bursary for a residency. We would like to work with an artist, or, you know, several artists, to design a residency around their needs. Now, wouldn't that be refreshing? And then from the start, you know, the pot of money is there. You can propose a piece of work that you'd like to do, and you can have a 2-way conversation about what that would look like in practice, and whether that's a good fit for both parties. Now, wouldn't that be fabulous?
Yeah.
That would be great.
One day, Sonia.
Well, you're both working towards it. You know.
I might do that. I might set that up and see how that rolls.
Set it up. Set it up. Let's set it up.
Yes.
And then my third point for good practice is be community informed, which I guess is the same as what we're saying. Does your offer genuinely meet a need? So I'm constantly seeing opportunity for, and I think, yeah, but is that really what that community would like? Have you done your research? And are you just offering the same thing that you would offer to, you know, is it the same offer to this group who have a different need without consideration of those particular needs? So, you know, is this wonderful idea that I hear a lot from Kate Adams on Project Artworks, that different people, is what you're saying, Jen, need different things. So in order to create equality, you have to provide something different. It's not that you've got to give everybody the same, because that doesn't work for everybody. It's that you actually have to offer something different to meet that person where they are.
Yeah. So why don't we talk about it a little bit from the perspective of the other side, right? So we've talked about obviously the artists and the submissions and those all those kind of elements, and it's been fantastic. And then just thinking about, you know, the museum staff or the gallery staff, obviously, you know, like we've said, there are a lot of cases where people can work from home, but there are some cases where they can't. You know, and particularly, let's say a conservator probably cannot work from home most of the time. So how can those spaces be made more neurodivergent friendly? You know, I guess with your, you know, experience that you have, kind of, I guess, from more of an artist perspective.
I think it's about if these people do have to go into these spaces, like welcoming them into a space that's like, you know, a calm space, quite a relaxed setting, nothing like formal, somewhere with like, you know, comfy chairs, have a chat with a cup of tea, so that they feel, you know, they're feeling relaxed in the first place. And then saying to them, you know, what is going to be the best way for you to do your, you know, what is the best that you could be capable of within this space? You know, how can we work with you to set that up? You know, we have this space over here, we have this space, are you suited to having, you know, would you be better near the window? It's about offering these opportunities, the possible ideas of where they could be situated in the building. But I'm sure Sonia will agree that they're also the idea of having this quiet space. So if everything gets too much for them during the daytime, there is this space that they can go to that is more like a chilled zone, where they can just take themselves away and be in that space. And when they feel ready, they can come back to whatever they were doing. And I think the importance of that cannot be stressed enough for neurodivergent and autistic people within the workplace, that they are they're not having to ask for that. It is being offered to them, and they're not going to be frowned upon or anything if they have to go and use that space. So it's, but it could be offered to, you know, everyone could be offered that. I'm sure most of us would like 5 minutes out of the day to be like, that meeting was really stressful, I'm just going to go and take myself into that space for 10 minutes and have like a moment to myself before I come back. Like everyone would like things like that, but most places wouldn't have that in place. And I think once you've talked to neurodivergent people, you'll see the benefits for everyone to have something like that set up in your workplace. You're not just singling out that one neurodivergent individual. You don't want them to be singled out. You want to be like, if you send a message around all staff, you might be like, we've created this space for everyone to use when they feel like they need to use it, rather than saying, Sonia says she needs this space, so just so everyone's aware, 3 down the hall is like Sonia's space.
It's the broom closet. No, I think you're definitely on the right path, like on the path that Sonia was talking about before, about kind of allowing for the personalization, right? That person to make the decisions. And I think one of the difficulties almost if you're looking at the kind of the professional art spaces versus the, you know, the artist spaces, is that the artists are more than often identified, right, as being neurodivergent, whereas the professionals may not be. And so the institutions, unless they feel, forced to make that space because someone has self-identified and, it may have disability accommodations or something, unless that happens, then those spaces aren't created, right, within the institutions.
I mean, I did sort of before the pandemic, just before the pandemic, I gave a talk to the, let me get this right, Disability Network at Tate, Britain, which is a network for staff around, it's like sort of like intersectional, so it's around various marginal identities. And they seem to be quite, they seem to be quite proactive in lobbying for themselves. And they said it was a bit slow, but things were moving at Tate. I know that for artists, you can have access riders, can't you, Jen? Disability access rides. I think it's very, very, very hard for people because, the stigma continues and is real. And it can be very, very difficult to come forward in an institution. And so I think really, if you don't have a diagnosis where you actually have your, so-called reasonable adjustments and accommodations listed, it can be extremely hard. I think actually things like, I guess it is becoming more acceptable now to talk about sensory needs, isn't it, in general? And I think also since the pandemic, people are more aware of mental health and the need for self-care.
Yeah,
I think if you're feeling anxious and worried about being stigmatized, I would maybe suggest generalizing, as Jen said, and maybe talking about, things more generally to do with well-being, try to set up some staff group for well-being, and get the conversation going around that. But if you do, if you do have that ability to come forward, it's so beneficial. It's like, well, I say that it works both ways. So you can then be, sidelined, which is horrible. I've had that happen, when you come forward and then actually people start thinking, well, that means you can't do something. And that has happened to some colleagues of mine too quite recently. But on a personal level, I guess because I'm so autonomous in everything I do, I actually find it incredibly empowering to be able to come forward and say things. But I guess that is privilege. So it's hard. I would maybe try and form a connection with other people, whether it be online or, in your local area. There is nothing like autistic community for that solidarity, neurodivergent community. And there are a lot of resources out there. I don't know, Mackenzie, if you're familiar with Academy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are online communities like Academy that provide, supportive groups and a lot of educational material as well, and research, which is really fascinating and very cutting edge, I think, which is affirmative. I think they may even have, on their resources page, they may even have something about the workplace.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah. So I think maybe it is really awful because workplaces should actually be doing this for you, whereas I guess in a lot of cases it is going to be everywhere I go. Obviously I take my noise cancelling headphones. I'm wearing my STIM gadget, which is my funky art jewelry. Everywhere I go, I've got something with me that looks like it might be a really cool art piece, but I can, I can squeeze it and pull at it if I need to. And I know it's not very environmentally friendly and it's a bit yucky, but I have chewing gum everywhere I go so that if I need to unclench my, there are lots of things that I use that I carry with me to support myself.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it is obviously disappointing that some of that stuff still has to be incognito, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
When I'm at home, I have a lightsaber Chewy that I have around my neck a lot of the time. It's great. Yes. Very helpful. But again, I work with a remote institution. which is very, kind of open to.
Yeah, and that's very wonderful. I think it's very wonderful. I think ultimately, it's a terrible thing to say, but ultimately, a lot of us do create, it's not a terrible thing to say, it's a very necessary thing to do. A lot of us do create like a bubble, a comfort bubble around ourselves. And I sometimes don't even know that I've done it. I forget that I've done it. And then when when it gets popped, you think, oh, okay, that's why I live the way I do, because, it's really rather unpleasant when that, when that bubble gets popped and you realize that there is still a lot of, pockets of absolute ignorance about.
Well, I think if you are someone who is neurodivergent in a professional space where you're worried about speaking up yourself, I mean, honestly, I think one of the kind of it's not ideal, but use your neurodivergent radar and find someone higher than you who you think could be.
Oh my God, that's so true. Do you know, I couldn't believe it. It's so wonderful because that is the truth. That is the truth. So the one thing that we haven't said yet, which I think is really worth saying, is we are many in the arts.
Yes.
There are so many neurodivergent autistic people in the arts. Oh my goodness. And also they're lurking in very high places. Of course they are.
Yep.
Because we have abilities across the board. And we have, some of us have abilities that really match the arts beautifully because, we're original thinkers, we're creative, we don't conform to the usual stereotype.
Right.
And there's an awful lot, and the arts conventionally is, a place where you can be a bit unusual, and that's actually can be quite a good thing. So it's a haven for people. But the breakthrough moment for me was seeing Peter Hislop or Heslip? I can never remember, at Arts Council, a very senior person in Arts Council, writing a very personal blog for Disability Arts Online about their late diagnosis of autism.
Wow.
And how important it is in the sector and how much change needs to take place and the barriers for artists. And it's just like, finally, wow, that's incredible. And probably some of your bosses, some of the directors of your organization will be neurodivergent. There's a lot of ADHD as well within the arts. You need that blue sky thinking where you can connect ideas, incredibly creatively. So yeah, I think that is really, really true. And the other thing I would say is if an organization is publicly funded, they have to support you. And if they're not doing this work, that is discriminatory and that is not okay. And sadly, it is up to some of us to have to lobby for that change, but it really shouldn't be. And they shouldn't have public funding if they're not getting it right.
The other thing I guess a lot of organizations aren't aware is that they can apply to get access to work to support people in the workplace. So individuals can apply to get it themselves, but then arts organizations can apply on behalf of people that work for them to get extra support in place for them in the workplace. And that might be when they're at home, it might be when they're going to a particular meeting or a conference. And I think lots of arts organizations don't realize that exists and that they're able to apply for that extra support to support people. And so Disability Arts Online have got great resources that they've done around that, where they've worked with a lot of disabled artists to bring the resources together, and they run a lot of training sessions in access to work, which I think is worth organizations looking into.
Because some of these things do cost money. I mean, even if you think about, for example, someone who has ADHD and needs a certain software to be able to keep themselves organized, I mean, that could make a huge difference in their work life, but it may not be something that would ever be approved by the institution because, they could be a small regional museum. So
yes, yeah.
And even the idea of using a software for that type of thing is already, revolutionary. And then the question of, okay, well, where does the money come from? So yeah, I think having, access to resources is definitely something that's really important for arts organizations, because already I think a lot of them are fighting for resources.
I mean, through access to work, you can also get mentoring, can't you, Jen? I mean, I think they're incredibly oversubscribed, but there's AS mentoring that are based in London. And I think more of these organizations will pop up regionally too. They probably do exist where, you know, you actually get help with the executive function, which is what we call, you know, the organizational capacity to be able to do all the admin that comes with being a freelance artist or working in an institution.
Wow, definitely. So many great ideas on this webinar. Thank you, both of you, for joining us today and talking about these. And Helen in the comments actually has said, this is such a wonderful panel with brilliant insights. I am a mother of a neurodivergent son, so you've highlighted issues I never would have thought about. I have to leave early, so I hope you can make the recording available. And what I missed, thank you very much.
That's great. And I'd love to know more about Articheck, because I didn't know about you before. So at some point it would be nice to connect.
Yes, well, yeah, I'd love to connect with both of you outside. Also, just moving to the UK, you know, I would love to do all of the things in the neurodivergent community. So I'll reach out to both of you, and I look forward to you know, continuing these conversations. So, all right, have a good evening, everyone.
Lovely to meet you. Thanks for inviting us. Bye.